This is a podcast with Buckley from Babelforce and Chris Airy from Compendium Solutions. Welcome to our show, Leaders with Suspicions. I hope you enjoy.
Good morning, Piers.
Morning, Chris.
Right, where are you today?
I'm in Berlin, Germany, which you probably can tell I don't have a German accent, right? So I'm originally from Ireland. That's probably easy to guess. Yeah, but I'm doing this from Berlin today.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about you and your business and how it all happened?
So, you can see I've got a salt and pepper look here. You know, it's not my first year in CX in customer service and contact center. That's the industry I'm working in. I've been in the industry for 26 years now, so just started before the new millennium. And I'm a pretty geeky CEO, Chris, to be honest. So I started out as an AI mathematician before it was all very popular and trendy like it is now. For my very first business card, I wish I had kept it, had a job title on it. It said machine learning mathematician in the year 2000, right? So, you know, like then that was a conversation stopper. Like nobody wanted to talk to you at a party if you said I'm a machine learner. And they still probably don't want to talk to you, but at least people might know what it means, right? So if you said machine learning, there's a larger proportion of the population who would know what that means nowadays. But yeah, we were basically originally trying to build things like now would be like a combination of, say, Alexa and ChatGPT. But we were trying to build those in the first years of the new millennium before there was iPhones. Smartphones hadn't existed even then. And so that's where I got my start. So I come from that background, but then I mainly worked for large enterprise organizations, actually out of the UK a lot and a lot in the US, and then in other countries as well, in Germany for a long time too. And when I was working out of the UK and the US, I was working for mega brands like, huge, like Fortune 500, Walgreens or Bank of America or British Gas, Centrica in the UK, similar companies in Europe as well, doing transformations of call centers, contact centers, customer experience. And those are, as you'd know, Chris, right? Those at the time, those were mega projects. Like often the bid team for that project would be Capgemini or Accenture. Maybe British Telecom would be in there as one of the partners. There'd be several other players. There might be a Fujitsu Siemens or another sort of system integrator alongside that. Then we'd be one part of it. Our part of it might be £5 million. The whole thing might be 50 million, and the 5 million was just to do IVR.
Imagine, I remember those days.
Yeah. So I come just to kind of place it. That's where I got started with. I moved from being a real techie building AI and algorithms to being more commercial and directly involved in bid teams, supporting bid teams on the product side in those kinds of huge bids. And then when I was living in London, I realized around 2007, I thought, this is crazy. The bottleneck in these huge projects is often the integration to the brownfield site that every business really is once it's running for a few years. And certainly medium or sized or enterprises are just huge, messy brownfield sites with massive boulders in them, in the field, right? They're just messy things to deal with. And most of the problem is integrating. And I realized, hey, with virtualization, cloud, with the API economy was already established, with the abilities that we have technically, we can probably do this 1,000 times cheaper. Not in the year 2007 when the idea struck me, but I could see that in a 10-year time frame, this could literally be not just 10 times better, but 1,000 times better. And that's where the original idea came from. And I tried to build a team a few times, but I didn't get the right team together until I lived in Germany, actually. And I just happened to meet the right folks, and I know it's a cliche, it all depends on the team, but it's true, right? Once you've got the right people, you go, now I could bet my house on this, but that doesn't happen until you've got those folks in place.
So it sounds like you never had any doubts about using your machine learning skills in the customer experience industry. It sounds like you never had a moment where I went, I'll go into real estate machine learning.
Well, I've never really, that's a good question, Chris. I've never, in those 26 years, I've never thought about stopping solving problems for CX leaders and going to do something else, HR or real estate. I've never thought of an industry change. My view on at each innovation phase we've gone through, right? Because they're speeding up, but at each innovation phase we've gone through, I have definitely decided that different solutions were necessary. So for example, I completely stopped doing machine learning and AI in any kind of big way between 2007, 2018, because, in my particular area, because I thought, most of these are kind of mega machine learning AI projects. It's very hard to get an ROI out of them. They don't necessarily do what the customer wants. I just felt like it was the bad fit. I thought the integration and automation problem in general was more significant and had better outcomes for the customers I was serving. So I focused really on that in that period. 2018 onwards, then I thought, oh, okay, now we can get somewhere with this AI stuff. And then I have really dug in and invested a lot in that. So my focus on the solution that's right for the customer has changed, but the industry has always been, my heart is in helping CX people.
I get that. I mean, I was just after the start of the millennium, I was at Vertex, which was like the UK's biggest transformation outsourcer. And interestingly, Capgemini sold their contact centers to Vertex. Yeah. And now they've gone and bought WNS. So I smirked the other week when they did that. But I see the buzz that you get working in this space, right? And if you have not worked in customer experience, for any of the listeners who haven't, there's just a buzz, you get from the vibe about the constant inflow of things to be solved. It's like an operational environment, but you're actually working with people at scale, and it's something that's quite hard to do in other industries. So I can understand why you stayed. And just one thing about your business card, I was thinking about that recently myself, actually, because I just spent 5 years in machine learning in maritime, and it's not Gen AI or machine learning mainly. It was, mainly the algorithmic, mathematical, vessel performance, digital twin stuff. And I was thinking, with all these people on LinkedIn and the internet, should I get a business card that says I'm a pre-Gen AI person? Is that another way of going back in time and saying, yeah, I was there before Gen AI?
Yeah, well, I mean, this won't mean I'll try and keep it, but like if we think about 2005, I was building natural language understanding things, and I was testing neural networks against other stuff, right? Neural networks, of course, are everywhere with LLMs, and we would be very, very happy if we could run a 100,000 parameter model. I know that won't mean everything, something to everybody, but like there's parameters in there in the model. There's a lot of them. Like now there's 400 billion in some of the foundational models like OpenAI or whatever, 400 billion compared to the 100,000 in 2006. And we didn't have the same techniques or technologies, and, it wasn't understood well enough. So, it's extraordinary what we've seen, Chris, right? And I'm definitely, I've revealed with my age and my old business card, I'm pre-Gen AI.
Pre-Gen AI, it's a new badge of honor. So let's talk about your business a little bit and then come back to the industry, because we could probably never if we start talking about the industry, we'll never come back to your business. So what does your typical day look like?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wake up very early usually, not because I want to, just, it's the way I'm built. I wake up about 5:45, something like that. And I usually listen to something like a podcast or something that I've got sort of lined up, an audiobook or whatever, because I'm actually not ready to start my day at 5:45, to be honest with you. And then I usually get going work-wise around 8 or so. Because I've got family and, there's a lot of stuff to sort out in the morning. And we're we're a kind of half remote company, half in the Berlin office. And Berlin, Germany is where our head office is. But a lot of our people are all over the place. So I travel quite a lot as well. So that's why I hesitated a bit on what a typical day looks like. So, there's not that many days that are the same, because I might be off somewhere in the US or a different country, or traveling around in Europe. And so, it's very, very, very varied for me. But a normal day, I get going 8. Yeah, I spend most of my time context switching, Chris, I guess, probably like you as well, right? I'm like, that's what C-level is about. So I'm kind of half-hour blocks, or, sometimes you block out a few hours if you've got board meetings, extra stuff, that can be longer. Sometimes I dig into product. With my geeky background, of course, I might block out a few hours every few weeks on something detailed in product or engineering, but mainly to support people. Like, I'm not allowed to touch technology anymore, right? I mean, but like just to, to guide, say, the product vision, and to understand what the brilliant people who are working working at Babelforce, what they're doing at the moment, and where they've got challenges and where they need to make management decisions. So I kind of move around a lot between strategic investor product vision, and then a lot of relationship stuff with the travel, with our partners, with all that we're involved with. Also visiting customers. I mean, we do enterprise, right? So if you're an enterprise, then as a C-level team member, you do a lot of customer stuff, actually, right? Yeah. Especially if you've got an external facing role like mine.
So let me come at the question from a different way. I mean, the podcast is about leaders with suspicions, yeah? And the suspicion bit is about what you choose to do because you think it's the right or most important thing to do. Okay. And I like to explore whether that's driven by personality or actually driven by facts and KPIs and the business need. So you just talked a bit about time blocking and how you spread your time. But do you feel you're choosing that agenda, you're prioritizing that agenda, you're working on the business, or is effectively the business controlling and shaping you by the flows of need from customers or investors?
I feel like you'll probably tell me, Chris, if we had enough time, that I'm doing it wrong, right? But I feel myself that I'm pretty good at the urgency importance matrix, and that, but I would not claim, I'd be reluctant to claim more than 80% of me driving the agenda and choosing where to put the time. I think I'm doing good if it's 80-20. Like the 20% being unforeseeables, for example, things you need to deal with that might not actually happen to have been the ones you want on the top of your either importance or urgency thing, well, typically urgency. And so there's always some of that, but I feel most of the time it's pretty KPI driven. And I know your business, Chris, so this is where I think you'll disagree with if we got into detail. But that's my feeling, at least, right? That's my suspicion. You want suspicions? Yeah. My suspicion is that it's mainly because, I mean, we're a SaaS company, right? So it's like ARR, North Star is ARR growth, recurring revenue. And all of the KPIs that kind of hang underneath that are all of the typical SaaS ones for enterprise ARR. So NRR, GRR, like net revenue retention, gross revenue retention. And since we have a CRO, a chief revenue officer. So Julian runs all of sales and marketing. I have a supporting role in there as a kind of very external facing CEO, but I'm quite technical. So it tends to be, the product vision part of it and helping customers understand the complexity of CX and AI and how we can help. So I'm involved there to some extent. And I think that involvement is very much related to, okay, is the ARR number going up at the right speed or not, essentially. And I think that's largely driven in the right direction. I think, I would say at the moment, it's difficult because of the innovation cycles. I'll give you an example, Chris, right? So we do voice bots, right? So where you call up and you can have a natural language discussion. It's just one of the products that we do, the product areas. We have to re-record our demos, marketing team re-records the demos every 1 quarter, maybe every 6 months, because the neural networks for generating voice from text get better that quickly at the moment. Now, that will plateau at some stage, right? But just as one example, it means we've got several moving parts that are moving faster than we have seen for a long time. And so I would say now I'm not doing 80-20. I think there are decisions that have to be rethought out much more frequently in that product vision and product strategy area than we would normally have in a regular innovation cycle. So I'm, I think it's difficult to maintain I'm driving the agenda feeling all the time in the current cycles that we're in.
Yeah, just to build on that, I guess one of the problems I also see is that when people make decisions about investing in digital or technology or AI, one of the dimensions that's really hard to predict at the moment is the rate of commoditization. Yeah, in the old days, you knew, I'm going to be an early adopter and I know I'm paying a premium and that premium will buy me 2 years or whatever the number might be. It seems to me that cycle is a lot shorter and that must affect your product decisions and your product investment life cycles, because some of the things that used to be great features, could be commodities very quickly or faster than you might have hoped, right? How is that rate of change affecting what you do?
Yeah, actually, it's because we're focused on helping CX professionals solve problems. We actually have this approach where we just mega honest about the AI. Like I mean, literally in the first meeting after we've done the demo, that's there's like the difference. There's the auto shows, the big auto shows with the concept cars, right? And then you see that car 3 years or 5 years later, the version of it that actually goes on the street, and there's a big difference, right? So I always kind of differentiate between the AI that is the concept car versus the AI that gets driven on the road. And there's a big difference, right? There's a big difference between what the CEO of Google decides to show on stage and what if you contact the company using their AI chatbot or something like that, between the two.
Yeah.
Really big. So I think what we try to say is exactly what you said, Chris. We just honestly say, I even tell them, hey, I'm re-recording. Our team is re-recording our voice demos every 3 months because that's the rate of change. So here's a plan for you to future-proof your approach. And we actually refuse, Chris, to wrap an AI. Like we will not wrap an AI and put our user interface or our code wrapper around it, because you're very likely to have to change it in 6 months or in 9 months or 12 months. So why would a company use our wrapper? How would we keep up with the pace of change? So we're much more about, let's be agnostic about the AI so that you, dear customer, can choose the right ones. And you'll probably have to choose multiple times for the next, who knows, 6 to 36 to 48 months, who knows how long. And that's how we're dealing with it. And I'm kind of comfortable with that because I keep being an old pre-Gen AI guy, as you said. I'm looking at the scientific papers. I can tell where we're reaching a plateau in some areas, but not in others, and I like a little bit ahead of times. But even with that, as these technologies climb the engineer's ladder and get better, get ready for productive use, the change is still going to be massive. I think it's impossible for a contact center that is busy doing all its other stuff to deal with this cycles. I think it's too much, to be honest, for them to handle. I think those transformations are really hard to manage. And I think you're right, Chris. You're right. Like, you don't buy a 2 or 3 year cycle where you can be comfortable at the moment.
No, and I think we'll come back to the adoption and contact centers in a minute. But I want to ask you one last question about your organization, which is how do you run your C-suite? Yeah, I mean, you've got enterprise grade customers, and you and the CRO are customer facing, but how do you make sure all of the rest of your C-suite really understand the customers? Do you make them all meet clients, for example?
So that is a really good question. And it's very difficult, actually. It can be difficult because we're simultaneously hyper relationship focused because we're dealing with enterprise clients, and their job is helping hundreds of thousands or millions of callers and emailers per month, like regular consumers, so we're super relationship driven. How do you manage relationships, even to the end user and certainly to our customers? And on the other hand, we're mega technical because we're an integration and automation platform for CX, so if you look at the cultural and personal preferences differences between the people who do the deepest tech we do, you can imagine, right? At the one end of the spectrum, you've got an engineer who's a voice over IP specialist, but simultaneously, and maybe how to deploy AI or something like that, right? And and at the other end, you've got people who just live for relationships, and they're in the same company. And basically, I would not claim. I would just say it's difficult. So how do you handle it then? Is your question. So we have top level representation of both the development arm and the platform arm at C-level. And then that's kind of balancing out the very, very relationship oriented sort of me and CRO, sales and marketing. And I think it just takes a lot of work, actually. A lot you have to know that the thing exists. I don't assume that it's easy to communicate, basically. It's very hard to get information from one person's head into another, even if they if they have the same basis. But if you don't have the same basis, you have to work doubly hard, right, at it. And so what we try to do, at least what I try to promote, and I won't claim to be 100% successful at this, but I try to promote, the needs of this person and the way that they receive that information is not the same as you think what you said. What you said is not what they received, and the other way around. And I think that's just an ongoing thing. I don't think that ends, basically, if cultures are that different.
Yeah, it's a generally open question because I agree it's very hard to solve. And I had it most recently in sort of managing international dev teams. I had Canadians and Ukrainians and Polish and Dutch and English and so on. So a very broad audience, yeah. And they would all react differently in terms of, You know, some would say we need to fix our process so that we get better requirements. Yeah. And then others would just say, well, just tell me what you want and I'll build it. Right. And if it's not right, that's on you. So people have their own different behaviors to add on to what you just said in terms of the NLP issues as well. But I often found that sometimes there was individual needs being expressed as team or group needs. So there might be a very curious individual in a scrum or squad or whatever you want to call it, who really wanted to be more involved in the product process. And you would hear that as requirements need to be better. But actually, that person just was more curious and wanted to know more. And I found it very, very complicated to manage things with a tool like Jira or Azure DevOps or whatever, where you're trying to manage things as if it's a factory. You know, the product requirements go in the front and the epics and the product people then hand over to the technical developers and then the QA, whatever your life cycle is. And that kind of waterfall approach, even though this is all meant to be an agile era and agile tools, quite often doesn't really cater for the difference in the personalities and the preferences and learning styles in the team. So I just wondered if you found the magic secret sauce, and it sounds like you recognize the problem, but yeah, it's a struggle for all of us.
I'm not going to claim definitely not the secret sauce there. I guess I mean I have an approach, you know, that so and it's more about dialogue management, like creating dialogue containers as opposed to like a management implementation approach, or you know, or management systems or process. You know, because all those things are there. They're all important. There's no question about it. But like what you're talking about there, Chris, is I think the key thing actually is what the person expresses. So we already said the sender receiver is already a problem. Before the sender is the bit you're talking about, is like, why does the person think it's important to get that message across? Right? What's going on with that person? And my belief is that you have to create containers where conversations can take place and people can at least, it's not going to happen all the time, but at least if it's offered, then people have the ability to express why they think that's important. And sometimes you get to something with that you didn't know from the message that the person tried to say in words, you know, but you get to it by the process of taking them seriously and asking them why it's important and why do you feel that way about it. And, you know, you keep on, you create enough space to talk about it. So I think you need a lot more space. Like often in business, you do a meeting and you try to get an outcome. You try to get an outcome. You try to get an outcome. Big danger for C-level, right? Because you have this half-hour time slots and context switches and so on. Super dangerous to just look for an outcome each time. And then sometimes you have to build in a lot of space, or at least definitely give the teams way more time to have space to discuss things. So that's I guess your word was suspicion. That's kind of my hunch. Reasonably kind of well informed, you know, as much as you can get in this area, not scientific. Yeah. Ask me again in 10 years, then, Chris, and I'll say, I still got the same hunch.
I feel like you just outed me. You've rebranded Hunch. You've spotted that we've rebranded Hunch really as suspicious. Yeah. Hopefully more data-driven than a gut hunch, but yeah, there you go.
Did you find a way with your mixed cultural teams?
I think it was in the end a little bit about authenticity. So particularly in an international, partly remote organization, you actually had to go and see them sit in a room and go out and break the ice. And in the end, they learn where you're coming from and therefore receive in a better way as well. If they receive in a better way, they feel more confident to communicate back. And some of those cultures were very much about, you know, until I've built it, I won't say it's possible. Okay.
Yeah.
And then other cultures are in the space of, I will make it happen. And blending those two things was probably the trickiest dimension, because particularly when you're at C-suite level, someone is asking you to give a date on a product roadmap, yeah, because customers have asked for something. And when you've got one culture which says, don't worry, we'll work through the nights and the weekends and get it done, we'll find a way. And another culture that says, I won't commit to anything until I've built it, and then I'll know how long it would have taken, right? It's like, it's really quite tricky being the meat and the sandwich of that one. So
yeah, right.
I think in the end, it comes down to their personal trust of you as a leader, that they understand that you're not trying to impose things. You have a need to say something. And how do we get to a compromise between those different points of view? What information are you really lacking? Why are you not comfortable in giving a target? Is it because that's your personality? Is it because the requirements are not coming in a way that you can receive? Is it that you don't have enough context? Is it that you don't see the jigsaw puzzle and you're just just seeing a piece of it. What, as you said in different ways, what is the driver behind the way you're behaving? It takes time and effort, and as you said, space to deal with those things. And that could be tricky when you're under relentless pressure from customers to deliver products and features, and you've got competitors out there and all the rest of it. Not easy.
Yeah. Time is the scarcest.
Back in 2008, I was on the board of a logistics business and we were turning it around. And the CEO put a technique in. I'll just share this with you and the listeners in case if there's any use. And what he did is he said, I'm going to take the top 20 customers and you six around the C-suite table. You're going to pair up and you're all going to have 4 to 5 each. And you've got to go and see them every quarter and be on the receiving end of the whole service feedback from those top 20 customers. And I think there was a little bit of science about who he paired with which client and all the rest of it. But it meant that, in your example, the CTO and the platform team, C-suite people, they had to go and see customers as well, but they weren't let out on their own. But they had to be in the room and walk in the shoes of the CRO, and you, now and again, but with the top important customers, So there was just a little bit of pushing us out of our comfort zone. And I think it did do a good thing on team building and hearing from the customer unfiltered, because often you're filtered.
Right. Is that an enterprise context, Chris? That like enterprise customers in that case?
It was enterprise retail customers, 300 million turnover business.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. Yeah. I mean, we have the good fortune that let's say our technical operations COO has to meet customers anyways, which is quite common for the contact center and call center thing, right? So that helps a lot. But I do really like that approach. I think it's also important because of this relationship first is very hard to understand if you're mainly involved in the technology, like the fact that everything you've delivered technology wise, like could be maybe completely irrelevant if you can't manage the relationship well. And like even bridging, if those meetings you're talking about, if they just got a modicum of interest from the technical leader in that area about what it means to really to really build a relationship and keep it. I think that's a big win already, like you don't even have to get much out of those meetings for them to be useful. So that's why I like the idea a lot.
Yeah, it was exactly that. And obviously we were better in year 2 than year 1. A bit more scared in year 1, to be honest. Very scared in the first meetings. Okay, so go back to your business then. As the CEO, what are your biggest challenges right now in the business?
So, I mean, I think we're a very fast growing business. So our ARR growth is like enterprise customer ARR growth is like 79% year over year. And you obviously can't maintain that for very long, right? So you have to really plan a trajectory of how do you maintain it as well as you possibly can. And it gets more difficult over time. No surprise there, right? Look at any customer's data. That when you're at a fairly mature stage but have that level of growth, then you really have to plan carefully because you're not going to be investing the way you did in the past. Like we had venture capital money and like we're getting out of that phase where you do that kind of spending. We're already well out of that now and you're in a completely different phase. So I think like tracking that, planning ahead on it, having a strategy, like knowingly going into that strategy change, the kind of inflection points that come along with that. That's I think that's the kind of like that's the very high level version of it, Chris. Obviously then for each person in different parts of the organization to understand that, who need to from the C level down, then is the communication challenge that has to happen and the planning challenge and so on. But like the top level is that, I think actually is that you have to go through that transition successfully. And we're well into that already. Like our last VC round was November 2022, right? So we're well into that track, but it remains the main focus. If I think about anything, I think about that,
Okay. But what does that mean in your business? Does that mean, you talked about the communication piece, but does it also mean a switch from product investment more towards customer support investment?
Yeah. So the parts of the team that keep growing are sales and marketing and customer success. So fulfillment. So right. Yeah. So which means that it's enterprise. So you kind of have a linear relationship between adding customers and adding customer success people and sales people. And so they keep on growing and the other parts of the business kind of slow down in terms of their growth. And on the profit and loss, then it means, then of course you spend a lot more on sales and marketing and customer success, and the other areas become a smaller percentage over time. So that's quite a lot of big changes, right? It also means that the number of people who have the culture that's completely relationship first, commercial, and so on, is much bigger over time than the engineering culture, let's say, whereas it would be different, exactly the other way around in the earlier years of a company like ours. So, and then that's something to manage, right? Because as you can imagine then, right, from our earlier discussion about just how different the mindsets can be in those two things.
Yeah, the DNA is really changing, isn't it? I often think when I do customer service and experience advisory that, quite often the customer call center could be a large team by head count. Yeah. Or in another operational like logistics business, the transport or the last mile delivery is a large part of the business. But it can create the wrong balance of DNA in the organization, from a customer and client point of view. The operationally centric versus actually who are the economic buyers. I guess you've got a different issue here because actually you're moving the DNA towards what clients will want, which is getting benefits out of your technology. But probably the introverts of the organization are probably screaming in their heads, aren't they? I used to feel really, really comfortable here. I'd talk techie all day, right? And now there's all of these strange people who talk a lot.
Yeah, I think my position is I respect that transition, like it's not like I don't assume that's easy at all to deal with for either party, actually, right? During each phase of it, I just think that's really, really tricky, actually, and it has to be then. And there's where you need some space. You got to create, like, regardless of time being short, you got to create space in there to bring that along. And even when you do that, there's a lot of hiccups and there's a lot of things to deal with. But at least going into it assuming that it's not easy, I think is half the battle.
Yeah. Let's move on to innovation. So, obviously, you're in a competitive industry against some other big platforms in this kind of space. So, two questions really. The first one is, how do you foster innovation within your business, right? And not just become a slave to competitors. And then I'll move on to the second question, which is more about how do you get clients to use your innovation. But if we just start with, how do you foster innovation?
Yeah, it's a really important area for us, very tricky because we're an integration automation platform. And so if we think about it simply, like our whole job is to be able to integrate the huge number of systems that are used in the contact center, right? So which means if you imagine from a technical touch point, we are integrated with everything, with SAP and Salesforce, and, every ERP and every CRM and every ticketing system, but also logistics and payments and all the AI components, right? So like if I showed you the logo graph, the big kind of infographic picture, you'd feel sick. To be honest, I avoid putting it up for anybody, even investors. And imagine if you're in that space and we literally have connectors built for all of them that are Lego blocks that people can use then to build processes in the contact center and in CX, then you've got a huge number of potential innovation choices and investment choices. Like some of them are related to how closely do you work with Salesforce or how closely do you work with Zendesk or whatever, right? Another one would be, there's this new AI product, but it doesn't apply equally across all of these things we do. So it's really important that we only do a go-to-market for a particular proposition. And so you have to choose the proposition and then you have to decide inside that proposition, that's where we put our R&D spend within the innovation bit. And tricky and then hardest of all, I think, in that whole matrix is that often the R&D spend is a tiny fraction of the go-to-market spend to make it work.
Yeah.
So like once you make a bet and you begin and you set the tanker moving in the ocean on the R&D part, you have to kind of see it to an end, actually, because it takes a long time to often come to fruition. And you also kind of have made a bet on spending 4 times that on the go-to-market part, right? And if you take all those together, plus what we talked about earlier about the speeded up innovation cycles, if it's AI products that you're integrating into that process, it's a real challenge, actually. What we try to do, what's my suspicion, to come back to your theme. So for us, we have to have like a very clear vision of the strategy that is unchangeable. Like what is the core driver that makes the business work? Like what are, and there's only two dimensions we can invest along that we decided. And then those dimensions remain there no matter what, because we know that that's what makes the go-to-market work. And so, and you know how it is, right, Chris? Once you've got the thing running, like you don't have many options. Like if you know that's your main direction, you might be able to go 1 degree, to the left from that direction with something. But that's the maximum you can do, because all other processes in the business, your go-to-market motions, the reason people believe you can do what you do, like everything is kind of tied to that one vector motion you're doing. And so that's how we keep it on track, essentially, is like measuring how many degrees is it away from that, And if it's a tiny bit away, we're kind of worried, right? Then it calls for a lot of assessment before we'll do it. That's basically the program that we go through, which can make it means that most decisions have to be considered very, very carefully, especially when it's a major innovation, like an AI direction, for example, would be an example of it.
From a leadership and cultural point of view, how does that work then? Because like innovation is meant to be naturally a creative process, right? That's the theory. But as you just said, you need to anchor it about who you are. And how do you manage that people challenge around the creativity versus the straitjacket, if I dramatize it in that way?
So interestingly, and I didn't necessarily know this, actually, like it was kind of surprised me, was that if you constantly take the time to communicate about that main vector that you're traveling along, that main direction, and with everybody who matters, like with the people who, when I say matters, I mean the people who help make decisions, the people who tend to have the motivation and the grit together to make something happen, then a lot of the things that come up in the organization kind of match the vector of travel, So I think that's a good thing. Now, there's always the danger then that maybe you should be going off in a different direction, right? And I don't think we have that problem. Actually, a lot of organizations, I've been in organizations before. I mean, I've worked in big organizations a lot of my life, and so I know that problem of the vector being the straitjacket being too tight, right? And then no innovation happens because it gets stifled too early. We honestly don't have that issue. We've got the opposite issue because of all this huge number of connector integrations that we do and processes that we allow people, because we allow people to build their own stuff, which means we're flooded actually with ideas. We're flooded. So it's more so our problem is mainly if we can get everybody with motivation and grit to understand the main vector, then there's so many concepts and ideas that we're likely to pick the right things. Not always, but there's a good chance at least.
Okay. Right. So let's move on back to your clients and customers and how they're successful. So one of the things I know from working in the BPO industry is that there's a real tension between mindsets that are driven by size of my team. I mean, that's hardwired into BPO companies, but even in customer services organizations, all of the measures of success are often around the size of the team that you manage and the span of control and how many divisions your contact customer experience center looks after. Yeah. And then it's been, since I joined the industry in about 2000, it's always been technology could do this, technology could do that. And the barrier has always been adoption and benefits realization. As you talked earlier on about in the early days to be, big multi-million-dollar, euro, pound, whatever investment to do the transition and the transformation, because the world was a lot simpler then. It was like, well, we need a balance sheet because there's a big capex and therefore there will be a team that will make it happen, right? And actually, now that all of that technology has become more available and more pay as you go, actually the people think less about a transformation team or a program management team, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. So what is that challenge you find, or your general perception in the industry around the barriers to technology adoption?
So I think there's two parts to the question, Chris. I guess there's one is about realizing benefits from the technology, right?
Yeah.
And the second part is about the kind of the barriers to adoption. Man, it's a big one. So we work, just to frame it in your BPO thing, I start there. So we work a lot with BPOs, but BPOs are usually not our main customer. Usually the CX leader, like the person in the organization who has budget and lots of initiatives that they need to improve things in customer experience. That's usually the people that we're dealing with in our side. That has changed a bit about the size of the team. Like it's become rare now in the last few years that there's any challenge around that bit. Like I'll give you an example, Chris. So we actually don't differentiate in our licenses between a human user of the license, like a traditional seat or a user license, and a virtual user, like being essentially an automation of some kind. And we don't necessarily say AI for that because it might be a whole bunch of algorithmic automations that are not AI, or it might have AI, or it might be a mixture. But in any case, you've got like this human user seat license, and we do no differentiation between the two. And you can shift from one to the other. And which means that, that's probably, I say that because that's probably why when we sit there and we talk about it with these people from the get-go or from very early in our relationship, it's going to be clear that that's the way we work. And that's probably why they're talking to us, or one of the reasons they're talking to us. So there tends to be quite a shift. But in the past, I had exactly the same experience as you talked about. But right now, everybody's trying to figure out like how much exactly is this new AI going to do for us, and how does it affect seats, number of people, and so on. And everybody's trying to work that out. And since we're at the core in our like business and our thinking of helping people to do that, and we don't care which one it is. Like some of our businesses are actually 100% human, and they stay that way. And they know they're that way because they're luxury brands or whatever, right? They deal with a complex process, and they know and they're not even trying to do much with the AI except use AI to help the human agent, do something. Other businesses are exactly the opposite, want to automate the hell out of everything. So is it realizable? For us, it's important that it's realizable. Like the ROI is realizable, the business benefits. And when I say that, I mean, that seems like an obvious statement, but what I mean is there's a lot of ROI calculations you can do that show a theoretical benefit of whatever they are, right? But usually I would sit down and say, hey, hang on a second, like how long are you bound to the other contract or the other cost base or whatever? How long is it going to stay on your profit and loss anyway? Even if we implement this, like, is it going to stay there for 2 or 3 years? Like, are you bound in your non-variable BPO contract to spend a certain amount of money one way or the other or not? Then you're not going to really, your business is probably going to be disappointed if you tell them you're going to realize this in principle theoretical benefit. It does turn out in CX, not all the time. I'd say maybe half the time that the ROI is realizable really quickly. Because of the variable components and the variable costs, of using external parties and so on. But a lot of the time it's hard to realize, and I think it's best to just be clear about that we're talking about potentially a shift in where you're spending your money as opposed to the money being literally saved. Now, I didn't answer the barrier. I hope that helps, Chris, in terms of the framing. On the barrier side, I think actually we did a lot of research on this, especially around the AI topic, because of course it's very hot right now. We want to talk about AI, but now that we've done hundreds and hundreds of AI projects already in the last few, post LLM, post ChatGPT, like we know more than we knew at the beginning of this whole hype cycle. And we have tried to map out what are the behaviors and the attributes of organizations who are achieving good results versus the ones that don't. And I won't go through them all. There was 5 main ones, but one of the key ones was whether the organization tries to go like grab the bull by the horns and go, look, we're going to do AI and we're going to do it in this mission critical thing. Like we're going to do it in this high volume thing that people call about all the time or write to us about all the time. So it's going to be high risk as a project, obviously, because we're tackling this mission critical thing. Those teams actually had better outcomes, like massively better outcomes than the ones who said, oh, this AI is a little bit scary. I think we'll find something over in the corner and spend a little bit of innovation money on it and see what happens. And of course, because they're trying to they're managing for the risk instead of realizing, hey, you should actually look at the use case and see, okay, let's get advice and find that this is productive, ready. I'm not talking about spending money on the latest bleeding edge thing. Find something that's in the zone of productivity or close to it and apply that. But then if you do, it's much better to actually to have a case that's big enough that your boss is going to care about how much money they're saving. And that's it can be counterintuitive, right? In an organization where there's a blame culture or where taking a risk is a bad thing, But I do actually, I have to be honest, I do try to find out, Chris, in early on in a relationship, whether the organization has that cultural issue or not. Because I think that's important information if you're in the business we're in, to know, is this an organization that tries to like kind of wrap the innovation and shove it over there and protect ourselves from it? Or are there innovators even up at the C level who are willing to back this and go into risk? And a lot of the time we can mainly be successful when there's that leadership taking the risk on their shoulder.
And one of the other things I wonder about when working with organizations is say the relationship between this customer services director or COO, or whatever the job title is, and the CFO. Yeah. Because in that example, you just talked about AI adoption, particularly in earlier days. Now you've got some case studies. People didn't know what the benefits could or would be, but they were asking for spend, right? So is that, you talked about blame culture and risk obsession as one dimension, but I also wonder, is there a thing about the relationship and the CFO's tolerance for investment? Put it another way, how over the top is their business case process?
Yeah, and you know what? Prior to this hype cycle, ChatGPT forwards, right, onwards, this was often critical thing, right? At the moment, we have, and there's good things and bad things about it, but we have a situation where people on the board know what ML and LLM and blah means, and they use Grok at the weekend, or they use ChatGPT to help their daughter do their homework with, or maths or whatever, right? That's the situation we're in. So there's somebody at C level, or maybe several people, and probably in their board as well, right, or among their non-executive directors, etc., who are going, just get going, right? Now, that has bad aspects and good aspects. And so at the moment, there's kind of scrambling inside the buyer organization and partially us, right, from the vendor side too, to figure the whole bloody thing out, right? So I think that relationship at the moment is in so much flux, and there's so much pressure to make a move, that it's not as big a deal as it was. Now I think this is my opinion, Chris, and I could be wrong, but I'll go out on a limb a little bit. I think the trough of disillusionment, as they call it in the hype cycle, I think the trough of disillusionment on the LLM-based AI for customer service is going to be quite deep, and people are going to be in it for quite a long time, because the hype was so big. The reality we know of how long it takes for something to really enter the productive zone is hard, is a hard path. And I think the reality, like that relationship now is resurfacing, going, okay, hang on, guys, we already did 78 projects all over our huge, Fortune 500 organization. Like, let's, time out. I'm the CFO. I'm going to take back the reins here, a little bit. That we're definitely in that phase now already. So I think that relationship is becoming more important again. I think it will maybe be the key relationship, because of what you said earlier, Chris. You said we don't know how fast the technologies will commoditize, or whether some of them need to be brought in-house at big organizations due to other risks or not. And then all this huge decision tree of strategic items is now coming to the fore, which means I think the caretakers, the people who are watching out for risk, the CFO, right, the CIO, etc. I think their role is becoming stronger again now. And that's good too. There's good reasons for that.
Yeah, it's one of my key interests is around CFO decision making, and how they behave in an organization really makes a difference to technology adoption. But I think you're very on the button there about AI is something the C-suite gets, right? And I think the last technology cycle that they got was probably the invention of websites in the sort of mid to late 90s. Yeah. Because you could actually see it, yeah. Everything else in between, like mainframe to PC, computer server in a room to the cloud, CEO, whatever, nerd speak, tech speak, it's right. But in your face, easy to grasp the concept of a website, yeah. Mobile phone, maybe I probably forgot that one, right?
Yeah.
And LLM, they're probably the ones that have broader ability of people to go, oh yeah. I get the principle. Right? Whereas all the rest of it is like someone getting excited about, oh, I've moved the computer in the corner to a computer in the cloud. You didn't come to see either,
Yeah. That's a really good way of putting it, Chris. I love that. I'm going to use that because, if it's true, when you get the hype cycles from Gartner or Deloitte or whatever, you get most of the technologies on most hype cycles are unintelligible. Like, think about edge computing, right?
Yeah.
Who's, right, a little while ago. Like, the fraction of people who actually know what the hell that's like why it's on the hype cycle is really small, right? And then, I mean, there's so many technologies climbing up the various hype curves there that are exactly fitting that what you're talking about, Chris. And the number that are really intelligent, like that people get kind of instinctively, or I get an intuition about, yeah, it's pretty small actually.
It is quite small, and I think that's one of the reasons that corporates don't innovate the way things have innovate in the consumer space, right? Because everyone talks about the plumbing, as I like to call it, right? Who cares? I mean, people care about their house sewage working when it smells bad, right? But other than that, that's plumbing, right? I don't want to see it. Oh, you got new bits of plumbing. Lovely. Anyway, I need to get off the soapbox, so this podcast never ends. If we come to the wrap, then this is the bit where I ask you, could you give me a lesson that you had to learn the hard way?
My God, the number of mistakes, Chris, that I've made is just astonishing. It's frightening. Actually, do you know what? That's maybe, I mean, I don't know if this is the right one, but it's the one that comes to me now, right? And it's the suspicion that jumps now into my head is what I didn't understand is that if your strategy is in the right direction, it's actually incredible how many mistakes you can absorb. If your strategy is off, though, by even 5%, I know that's stupid here, there's no numericals, but you know what I mean? Like if that vector we were talking about earlier, if you haven't got the right one and you're off by 5%, then mistakes really, really, really hurt. And I think at times in the past, I mean, before product market fit, I'm talking years ago now, like 10 years ago, I think that I think I would have liked to put way more time into the strategy vector, but sometimes you're moving fast. So you think you've got the right one and you haven't put enough time into it, but you're off a bit. And so then a lot of your other decisions then don't work. And then your mistakes really hurt you badly. But like, it is truly remarkable. I mean, you've seen a lot of businesses, right? The number of things you can do wrong is actually bigger than you think if you're heading in the right direction.
Okay, but that's really useful insight for people because it's like you believe and can evidence that you can absorb more shocks if you're generally going in the right direction and doing good things for customers. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. It's maybe it's a somewhat negative way to end, Chris, on the wrap, or maybe not, because like sometimes people are afraid to start a business, right? If you in the founder area, right? It's a big topic, and I think it's an important thing to know that it's not about perfection necessarily in every area. It's much more about understanding just how difficult it is, but anyway, doing it, and then trying most of the time to do it in the right order. That's being decisive about trying to do things in the right order might be more important than anything else, actually.
Okay, I think we'll wrap on that. I think those last comments there about spending enough time on your strategic direction, and the one you said right at the start about it only worked when I found the right team. I think they're probably two really good ways to summarize lessons in this podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Piers. I really appreciate the time and enjoy the rest of your week.
Chris, lovely being here.